thank you very much for joining us for this session. This is the last tech session of the day, and very pleased to have our good friend Bill Schnoor here, down from Boston, to moderate the panel. We've heard on a lot of topics earlier today on very specific things, but I think one thing that we thought would be interesting would be to ask Bill, who's a very old hand at helping technology companies, sort of take a broader view of some of the challenges in implementing innovation, and to get some experts in with very different perspectives in terms of what they see as the challenges for innovation actually making it into the marketplace. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm Bill Schnoor. I'm a partner with Goodwin Procter. I'm based in Boston, but I'm part of a team that works all over the U.S. and worldwide, working with entrepreneurs and startups in life sciences, technology, consumer enterprise across the board. We can start small, but we obviously make our economics by scaling big. So this is all about scaling and growing and implementing innovation. That's where I spend my time. I'm thrilled to be here today. I think we've got a great panel to kind of tackle some of the challenges of implementing and advancing innovation. We have a couple of investors. We've got somebody who's working on innovation within the setting of a much larger enterprise, and we have a scrappy entrepreneur. So I'm going to do very brief intros and then turn it over to the experts, our panelists. They can talk a little bit about themselves, the roles they play in the innovation economy. We then have a few questions we've kind of pre-agreed to kick around, but we welcome any questions, comments, or input from anyone in the crowd. There's a little side wager going among the panels, which we may tell you about later in the day. Anyway, without any further ado, let me first introduce Yuli Ziv. She's our entrepreneur. She started a company she'll tell you a bit about, which she sold to Launchmetrics a few years ago, and is now running Launchmetrics efforts here in the U.S. So, Yuli?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm based in New York City, and I started my career, I immigrated twice. I was born in Russia, then started my career in Israel. So it was kind of like immersed in that startup ecosystem over there. Moved to New York 14 years ago. And then I guess my area of disruption, because this is the subject of our panel, is really the online advertising space and also fashion industry, really understanding how what influencers consumers these days, and this is one of the kind of biggest questions that a lot of the brands and the Fortune 500 companies are asking themselves today. And to me, it was really fascinating to watch this space, kind of like from the very early ages, back from when I started in an Israeli startup in the late 90s that was in an online advertising space, and then later on in 2008, launching one of the first influencer marketing networks, which I sold last year actually to Launchmetrics, and now I'm continuing to build that business as part of Launchmetrics' suite of software and data tools that are geared for fashion, beauty, and luxury industries. And to me, what's fascinating about those industries in particular, because they're really relying on consumers, and those products are really driven by emotion, a lot of them. And I think what we're seeing in terms of innovation in the space in the past few years, how consumers kind of like taking charge and control. And this is for me really a big area of my interest, figuring out how consumers' brain works and how it's disrupting a lot of different areas, from marketing to product development. So that's kind of my area of expertise. I built my company from zero by cashing my 401k to building it to a company that produced millions of dollars a year. So it's been a really exciting journey for me to kind of be able to build something from scratch and then sell it and see another brand kind of like finding value in what I've built.
Thanks, Yuli. What Yuli didn't tell us is that along the way, she also had a son who's about 18 months old now. So if I do the math right, that was right around the time you were selling the business.
Yes, I was selling my company and having a baby in the same year, which is a whole other panel topic.
Okay, thanks. So at the other stream, we've got Adrian Horton, who's a GP with the Safer Made Fund. Adrian.
Thank you, Bill. So as Bill just said, I'm a general partner with Safer Made, an early-stage venture capital fund where we invest in technologies and technology companies and product companies that bring to market products that remove or reduce the use of chemicals of concern, of some harmful chemical. So, you know, the other way to put it would be either something that Patagonia or seventh generation would use to differentiate in front of the consumer, or actually companies that bring technology-based consumer products to market. Give you a couple of examples. One of the companies we invested in is developing a new effective and safe insect repellent, which is an alternative to DEET. The active is licensed from North Carolina State University. So it's an example of innovation in the consumer space. Another company, for example, we invested in is a consumer packaging company that seventh generation is their largest customer. So that's kind of what we do. We focus on technologies and products that differentiate in front of the consumer, driven by people's desire or need to buy products that are safer. We work closely with leading brands within each product category, and we look to invest in technologies that the leading brands need, and they know they need them, and they say they need them. Yeah, we're a small early stage fund, so involved exactly in this space of technology adoption. I'm a graduate of the School of Forestry here, and I've been a member of what I'd call the Yale entrepreneurial ecosystem for the last 10 years.
Thanks, Adrian. Next, we have Kaushik Datta, who's visiting us from Atlanta, where he runs an IT innovation hub for Mercedes-Benz USA.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I'll mention some numbers just to give you some context who I am. My name is Kaushik Datta. 1991, 1994, 1997, 2000, 2012, 2015. Here I am in front of you. You just traveled my career. 91 I graduated, 94 I came to this country, 97 I got married, 2000 I had my first daughter. I joined Mercedes-Benz USA as a contractor in IT. 2003 I joined the company as an employee. 2008 was an interesting year where I got to lead a team. We were the first probably automotive company to have our brand website built internally within IT. So that was a pretty interesting thing, I think. And then 2012, we saw a trend of adoption of mobile devices. How do we actually bring these things in the dealership? Because we had our consumers coming with these devices, whereas the dealers were not ready with these devices. So that was an interesting time. 2015, the company decided to move from Mercedes-Benz headquarters from Montvale to Atlanta. So decided to move with the family there. All I can say is my back is all good. I don't have to snow, do the snow removal. One thing is interesting about Mercedes-Benz USA. Whenever I go to these kind of sessions, my first job in 1991 was actually in a startup. That startup no longer exists. 130 plus years ago, Mercedes-Benz was a startup, just to give you a context. We were solving the problem of the horse. And we are still struggling to deal with the emission problem that was there. We are a very small team within MBUSA IT. We are just 3 people. We just started last year. So we're just trying to find out, how do we actually bring innovation, the mindset, the products to the consumer by watching actually human beings in their own world.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mark Singer, who's a co-founder and managing partner with Osage University Ventures.
Thanks. I'll take least also. So hi again, I'm Mark Singer, and I'm a managing partner with Osage University Partners. We're a venture capital firm that invests solely in university spinouts. So we partner with universities to invest in their spinouts, and those partner universities actually share in our profit from our investments. We started the firm in 2009. Yale was one of our first 5 partner universities and has been a great partner for us. Since then, we've scaled where we now have almost 100 universities university partnerships. We've invested in about 85 university spinouts across many different sectors. That includes, on the tech side, software, hardware, materials, and energy, and on the life science side, therapeutics, devices, and diagnostics. And so when we work with a university, we try to get to know all of their constituent startups, those that are starting right now and those that may have started 5 or 10 years ago, as we're looking for investment opportunities. From Yale, we've invested in a number of spinouts, including Quantum Circuits, which you heard speak earlier today, as well as a number of life science companies such as Artisan and Biohaven.
Great, thanks, Mark. So to turn to some of the questions that we wanted to address, we've got a great diversity and range of experiences among the panels. So I thought at the outset we might just touch upon, the question of what are the settings where innovation takes place. What are the pluses, what are the drawbacks to each of them? Mark, I thought I might start with you since you're kind of branded as university partner.
Yeah. So I could speak.
Since we are at Yale University.
Right. So there's the university setting where innovation takes place, but to take it one step further, where does that university technology go? And so we obviously focus on technologies going into startups. And if you look at most tech transfer offices in the US, in particular as it relates to what they would call physical science technology, as opposed to life science technology, more and more of that goes into startups every year because the university ecosystem and the tech transfer ecosystem has concluded it is a better way to commercialize physical science technology. We obviously agree with that. So there are lots of challenges in developing startups, which we'll talk about, but we think startups are a great mechanism to do it. We see those startups then partner with corporations like Mercedes and others, and so kind of managing that divide of how do you take startup technology and move it into a major corporation is a huge opportunity and a huge problem. I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Mark, would you elaborate and just follow up a bit on the role that licensing and transfer offices play?
Yeah. Pretty much every company we invest in has, in fact, licensed technology from universities. So from our standpoint, it is a really critical asset of the company. The reason why is that if you've licensed technology out of a university, you've taken a body of research that has on average about 10 years of work behind it, a significant amount of funding behind it, and so it's pretty robust technology. It's not commercially proven, it's not yet commercially viable, but it's robust, and it's also generally protected because the tech transfer office is the office within the university that is filing all patents and protecting those patents. So you wind up with this robust, protected set of technology that you can then commercialize off of. And so that dynamic is incredibly valuable for these startups, and in a world where capital has gotten cheap and as a result, startup creation has gotten easy. Having a big IP portfolio that protects what you're doing is really valuable. And so one of the premises of our fund is investing in companies that have deep IP protection, and deep technology leads to better outcomes. And if you look historically, that has generally been true. So deep technology companies in general have a higher rate of success than non-technology startups. Sometimes you have a lower multiple in success because they need to raise a lot of capital, usually to progress the technology down the road. But in general, the dynamics around that we find make really favorable startup investing.
Adrian, how about you? Are a lot of the companies you're involved with coming out of universities?
Some. I was trying to sort of do a little inventory in my head. One of the companies I mentioned did the actual technology came from the university, but most of what we see actually is just all over the place, to be honest. People coming out of large companies that understand the needs, understand the sector, people who did this as their master's program when they were in grad schools, and a lot in between. We've seen quite a few people who start with a need in mind and then go out and find the technology, which we think it's actually a great way to go about it. And Mark talked a lot about the good part. I can talk a little bit about so I've sat many a time looking at a technology from a university trying to think, what could this be good at? And that's an interesting question. What the application is, what sometimes there's several applications that a company can go after early on, and so how to choose the right one is a very important question early on.
Great. And Yuli, you can reflect on your own startup. Were you university affiliated, or were you out on your own?
I kind of had the opposite experience. I didn't have the luxury of developing my ideas in academic settings. And, for me, the best thing in my life that I did was quitting my dream job one day, totally irrationally and without any plan. And I think people say sometimes you're lucky, and I really don't think it's a luck. It's putting yourself in a setting that is uncomfortable, that taking you outside of the comfort zone and forcing you to figure it out. That for me was the best decision. I was not I didn't come from a financial background. I didn't come from a business background. My education was actually it's art and technology. I spent about 10 years studying art, then another 5 years studying technology. So I just thought, until I put myself in this uncomfortable position where I'm forced to figure it out and, sell my ideas and figure out the business plan and learn the financials behind the business. And it was, looking back, the best decision I made, because that experience forced me to learn maybe the hard way, all those things, but eventually to succeed. So to me, it was really important to experience personally all those different pieces of building a business, from starting from scratch, from learning all those different aspects of the business and understanding. I think in a lot of startups, we see people that you have the technical person, you have the product person, you have the business person. I didn't have that luxury, so I had to be it all and wear all those multiple hats. And I really loved that experience that allowed me to really learn all different aspects of running a business, understanding, because I had a little bit of development background, so I could speak to my developers who were building my technology, but I was also forced to sell because I had to produce revenue basically from day one. So actually talking to potential customers forced me to build something that was actually useful and not just an idea that I had in my head and I was hoping it will work out. So I think to me that was the best path through the personal experience.
What was the dream job that you quit?
The dream job, I was working at as a head of, I started creative department, one of the biggest digital agencies, and it was around 2006-07. They were doing really innovative stuff with some in online advertising area. And to me, when I came to New York, it was always a dream to have my corner office at a big agency. That was a dream. And then once I got it, I realized, okay, I need to be an entrepreneur. It came to the point that physically, I just couldn't be in the office anymore. I had to quit and just start my journey. And I think those are one of the best moments when you have that drive and, you just jump and work things out.
Thank you. That's great. So Kaushik, you indicated you work in a 130-year-old startup, which has grown into a pretty large enterprise globally. Would you talk about how innovation happens at Mercedes-Benz and how much is internal, how much is external?
Yeah, I think for a larger corporation, it's very important to look at both internally things and externally. The Daimler as an organization is partnering with startups where they have already solved some problem, which is relatively easy to bring in. I'll give you one example. I don't know whether you have noticed the addressing system that we have. This addressing system that we have today, that we are used to, is actually not meant for digital age. What do I mean by that? I'm in my Mercedes car driving and looking for a name of the road or a place. And if you come to Atlanta, there are many Peachtree roads. So if you type Peachtree, you don't know whether you type the right address. So you don't know whether you're going to reach at the right place. So that's a challenge. So what was interesting is we actually looked at the startup world also, and then we have programs where we have our own incubator where we bring ideas and develop ideas. So I'll tell you about this company. This company is called What 3 Words, and I'm not sure how many people you have heard about them. Daimler has invested in that company. What they have done is broken the entire Earth into 57 trillion points, each square being 10 feet by 10 feet, and each square has 3-word address. So now that 3-word address, you can actually say, and it'll come to your car. So that's a unique address where the car can go. It's ready for us today, in the sense that this feature is going to be available in the cars coming up soon here and also in US at some point. And also for future autonomous cars. The autonomous cars have to go at certain place. So these 3 words probably is a very unique thing. So yes, we do see challenges of working inside, which means, we are working on autonomous cars, which is like developed within using Daimler technologies, and also with startups. So we see a combination of all that, and that's probably one of the reasons why we are considered still probably an innovative company.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, with your permission, can we come back to something Adrian talked about? Because I think it's like one of the cruxes of the challenges of implementing innovation, in particular out of universities, which I thought was spot on, in that universities develop lots of technologies that then go in search of a market or in search of a product. They're driven by terrific academics who make great discoveries, radical new materials or a new drug or a new platform, and then figure out how do I apply that. And that's often the opposite of innovation and entrepreneurship in the rest of the world, which starts with a problem and then figures out how do I go solve that problem. So it is truly unique here, and we face that problem all the time. I'm sure you do too, Kaushik and Adrian. And so to give you an example of that, if you go back to the early days of machine learning and artificial intelligence, almost all of the body of work and technology and innovation in the AI and ML worlds came out of universities. Some out of Georgia Tech, actually, down in Atlanta. And we actually invested in some platform companies that were machine learning companies or AI companies who then went in search of a market. And they were platforms that other people could use and try to figure out how to apply it. And that generally does not work. It hasn't worked for us and generally doesn't work in general. And if you fast forward to today, every artificial intelligence company you hear about is focused on a specific vertical solution and a specific problem and addressing that problem. And that works really well. And so getting from that beginning of just the technology to the end, which is a vertically focused product that addresses a specific pain point in the market, is really hard. The faster you can do it, the better. And many entrepreneurs and investors have lost a lot of time and money on that struggle, in particular around university technologies.
Mark, your comments actually trigger a question we hadn't talked about in advance, but I might throw out there to be a little provocative. There's been some really interesting activity in the last few years of large technology companies, extremely well capitalized, basically raiding entire academic departments. Uber basically brought on board an entire robotics department from Carnegie Mellon. Facebook is setting up research centers in a number of university-based towns around the country, basically hoovering up large numbers of AI researchers. Is that a neutral development, a positive development, or a negative development from the perspective of the larger innovation ecosystem, in your view?
From our standpoint, it's, well, I guess to answer two, from a startup standpoint and from a university standpoint, it's generally been a negative. So from the university standpoint, they've hired a lot of faculty and grad students have gotten hired away. That I think it was painful at Carnegie Mellon, what happened there, both around robotics and autonomy, and some other universities. From a startup standpoint, startups live and die on the quality of their talent. And so there's been this giant talent drain by, in particular, Google and Facebook, who will pay extraordinary amounts of money to hire data scientists and other technical experts. And so it makes it hard for our companies to staff up there. So that piece has been really difficult. The flip side is the positive is sometimes they will buy your company because they want the people. So we sold a company to Amazon last year that had not yet perfected its own business model, but they wanted the people and the underlying technology. So it can go your way as well. But in general, I think from a startup standpoint, it makes it hard.
Okay, thank you. So then, we touched on some of these different settings. So as you look at the companies you invest in the case of Mark and Adrian, or as you look at your own activities within the big enterprise or as a startup entrepreneur, what are the biggest barriers to succeeding in bringing innovation to the marketplace? Is it capital? Is it people? Is it competitive landscape? Is it regulatory barriers?
I mean, to me, the biggest challenge is changing people's behavior and patterns, right? We're all made of cells and we have those patterns of behavior. And I think typically innovation, no matter which industry you look at, you're forcing someone to kind of like think differently, change their process that they're used to doing. And, I chose, and my company operates in the fashion space in particular, and that's a very challenging industry, although it doesn't have, I would say, as many regulations as maybe, the medical industry, but there's kind of like, if you think about fashion industry, there hasn't much been innovated since maybe like the Industrial Revolution, right? It was the last time that fashion industry was disrupted. If you look at our clothes, they're still not smart. Like we're paying, $700 for our phones, and we have paying $700 for your suits, and what are you getting in return? And our phones are so much more smarter than what we're wearing. So I think there's just so much to be done in this industry, but because it's kind of like caught up in this kind of like a cycle of, it's very seasonal and kind of like it repeats itself. And every year those brands kind of like, they feel like they're forced to produce more and more and kind of like chase the trends, the different type of innovation. And what they're missing is kind of like some fundamental way of producing and marketing that is completely changing in today's environment. And I think it's really hard to kind of like stop for a second when you're in that kind of like seasonal, continuously manufacturing industry. It's really hard to kind of like pause for a moment and say, okay, everything around me changed. How is my company, how is my product changing? And, and I wish more and more kind of like brands in this industry did that. I think we're seeing a little bit, with the Nikes of the world really starting to look at products in their shoe, just like they look at the smartphone and thinking about all the features and thinking more long term. Because I think the industry has been thinking had such a short term thinking. And this is kind of like what we try at Launch Metrics now, this new kind of like a big global software and data company. We're trying to slowly automate all those different parts of the industry, because you can kind of like come in with a whole new platform. So the way to innovate is maybe to start with automating some of the parts of the process and kind of like slowly make that change. So they started from, automating the whole kind of like sample shipment and adding like RFID chip to that, automating the way those brands produce their events and contacts and things like that. So it's kind of like, I love the idea of kind of like taking piece by piece and introducing innovation this way, because I think it was kind of like easier for people to digest than kind of like changing their work process completely.
So just a quick follow-up. You said at the outset that the challenge is shaping consumer behavior, and you mentioned earlier how you benefited because you did sort of jump in without necessarily checking if your parachute was packed, which forced you to engage with customers and understand what they want. Henry Ford once said famously that if he asked his prospective customers what they wanted when he started Ford, their response would have been faster horses, which wouldn't have worked so well. How much of it is really having like the Steve Jobs genius to see what people want before they even know it, versus doing deep market research and understanding what current pain points and indifference curves and desires are today?
Yeah, no, I think it's
balance those two.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you have to have the macro and micro vision, right? I think it's not losing kind of like where we're going and how consumer is changing overall. I think if you look at the consumer behavior, for example, 70% of purchases in the luxury product section are influenced by digital interactions these days. It's something that didn't even exist 10 years ago. So that's completely new metric and completely new kind of consumer behavior that brands are not even kind of like aware of. So, but the thing is, I think if you just come to brands and say, forget your retail, like digital now is where your consumer is, that's a little too drastic of a change. So you kind of like, that's what I'm saying, you have to kind of like have the macro vision, but then come up with the steps that kind of like get you there, realizing that we're talking to real brands, to companies that in this kind of like still depending on manufacturing, for example, and they can't change that quickly. And this is the reality.
including Pinterest, which was started by Yale, I might add. Kaushik, you look like you were, and since I did touch on the Ford, I think I have to give Mercedes equal time.
Very quick thing, you lead the great points. One other thing, it reminds me of a very interesting quote, which is what is behind the scenes for my team also. The range of things that we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. It's actually a quote from Daniel Goleman's book. It's a very profound thing. So what we feel is like we should actually go out there. Typically, IT organization is usually, order taker. What do you want? I want this. Well, it's like if you go to a restaurant and you say like, I want this. Oh, sorry, we don't have this. We have that. Will that work? That doesn't work. So it's very important. What we think is go out of the four walls, go and spend time with the people and figure out what's going on in their lives. And if we go and deliberately look at that and kind of ignore the cognitive biases that are there, and then what comes out is core facts. And then if we build products based on that core fact, people are reaching out for it. It's very interesting. I'm actually writing with a pen. It's an erasable pen. So, that's a very simple thing to notice. I wish people had built erasable pen a long time back. That didn't happen. Those are the things that we need to notice. We need to go out there. And how do you go about doing that? Well, there are certain tools and techniques available. So and that is the challenge we are facing internally. Like, how do we bring that mindset? How do we bring that tool set to actually tell people, like, let's do this, rather than, oh, I have this Java framework. Typically, that's how IT people look at their lives. I have a framework. We need to use this framework versus that framework, without realizing how a person is actually using it.
Thanks. Adrian, you had a point.
Yeah, to add something to this, I'll break it down in two parts. If you imagine on a 2x2, technology risk and market risk, right? So if you're involved in technology or bringing technology to market, which of you, put your hand up if you're involved in information technology? Things made of zeros and ones, okay. Now, put your hand up if you're involved in therapeutics. Molecules, protectable molecules, okay. And then put your hand up if you're in between. Things made of molecules, but not therapeutics. Things, technology. Good. So I like to think, information technology is basically 0% technology risk, 100% market risk. If you can mock it, you can code it. If you know what you want, you can code it. It just takes some money. But you code it, you put it out there, you find out whether people want it or use it or not. You can recode it. It creates its own problems. At the other end of the spectrum, therapeutics, it's 100% market, 100% technology risk, 0% market risk. Usually you know the indication, you know how it should work. If it works, it usually has a market. So those are actually simple cases. They're pretty straightforward what the barriers are there. Pretty much in information technology, you need to put some money together to show it to someone and get some feedback going. And in therapeutics, you need clinical trials. You need to raise a lot of money and do the hard work and hard science. There's no way around that. Things made of molecule in between have themselves, usually I break them down into sort of subsets. Things more on the consumer side probably more have a higher level of market risk, maybe lower level of technology risk. Things more on the industrial side where the scale-up involved, usually a higher level of technology risk, a bit lower level of market risk. Often people think that, these are existing markets. You can sort of rationalize, not like with the consumer. You don't know upfront. You put it out there, see what happens. So those are actually more difficult. And those are where the path is not always clear, the path is circular, but still within each sector, essentially, it's very sector dependent in those places, how innovation gets adopted. I would argue that if you're in the consumer space, you go to brands because they are in the business of putting products out there that people want to buy. If you're in the industrial space, there's often no way around some joint development with some existing players just because of scale, because usually you need existing other capabilities that you can't really develop all. So I'll stop here.
Okay, how much of a barrier is capital, access to capital? Is there too much money out there, too little? Most entrepreneurs I talk to think there's too little until they raise money, and they think there's too much because they suddenly have 4 competitors.
I wouldn't say this. I think it's a bit too much, probably. I've always had this. If you look at total amount of venture capital raised, there's NVCA, National Venture Capital Association, has statistics going back early 90s. You post sort of the big crash of year 2000 and before, if you look at the amounts raised, after the crash, the total amounts raised per year stabilized somewhere around 3 times more than before, sort of in the mid to late 90s. And so we've had the internet as a platform, we've had maybe smartphones as a platform, but we haven't had many more coming completely brand new smashing things since then. Maybe the sort of driverless cars will be another one, I don't know. But there is a lot of capital. The problem is not that there's too little, too late. It's just how the capital flows, what it chases, how informed it is, how smart it is, if you want. But that's, why it's a sort of it's not an assembly line business.
I would say that while that's true in aggregate, the amount of capital, there is too much capital in the market. We're also in a world where there are haves and have-nots around capital. So there are, if you just look underneath the hood of what's happened in funding in the last several years, the number of funding rounds has gone down while the amount of funding itself has gone up. And the number of early stage financings has gone down steadily since, I think, 2014. And so actually it's gotten a little bit harder for most early stage companies to raise capital. At the same time, it's gotten a lot easier for a small subset of companies deemed to be hot, successful, often later stage unicorn type companies, but not always raise capital. So it's a weird world in that way where you got to be careful about saying there's too much capital, because most entrepreneurs, I'm sure there are some here in the world, are thinking this is hard. Like I can't get my first $1 million of capital. And so, it's important to think beyond just the investor world and find other ways to be able to raise capital. So customer funding, joint development projects often work pretty well also.
Mark, it's sort of like somebody who has 1 foot in a bucket of ice water, 1 foot in a bucket of boiling water, who on average feels pretty comfortable.
That's exactly right. And while this is not the biotech part of the Yale day, on the biotech side, it's more overheated. Like there is right now, if you look at the percent of, say, university spinouts that have raised $10 million of venture or more in therapeutics, it's actually shockingly high. And so there's a lot of funding in biotech right now. But on non-biotech side, I think it's a little more challenging.
Yeah. We have an Excel spreadsheet where we put all the companies that we come across, look at, and so we made 2 investments so far, and Excel spreadsheet is getting close to about 300 now. So so we're about to probably make our 3rd. So that 1 in 100 ratio still stays. That's for us, but for every fund. So yeah, 99. We talked to 99 companies that we didn't invest in.
So there's a venture fund that's based in Boston called Bessemer Venture Partners that famously on its website tracks its anti-portfolio, which is they basically track the most successful companies they've turned down early on. Are you tracking your anti-portfolio?
Yes.
How about you, Mark?
We do, and it's painful, but you also, this is our rationalization to ourselves when we have these painful companies that we miss on and they were successful. You want some of this. Like we look at it, if you don't have any deals that pass on, then your deal flow isn't good, that are good, then your deal flow isn't good enough. If all the good deals are the ones you're doing, something is wrong with your deal flow. And so we want to see some. The key is you don't want to see too many, and you want to learn from those mistakes. I would say that I think kind of innovation, startups, venture investing is all in some sense an odds game. So with every company we are either turning down or investing in, there is some probability of success of that company and some payout in success. And so sometimes you will turn down companies that you're probably right only has a 1 or 2% probability of success, but then the payout is enormous. Uber is a good example of this. The number of people who, when Uber first started, it was not as obvious as it is today what would happen. but it's the 1 in 100 success.
Yeah, that website, by the way, that I fully recommend everybody reads. It's the best piece of venture capital humor that I've ever come across, because it also tells the story of how they turned it down, who talked to them, why, and their silly rationalizations back at that time.
Okay, so this is a question either you, Adrian, or Mark can answer. What's your most painful miss? What's the one that hurts the most looking back at it?
Funny enough, well, so first, our firm, Osage University Partners, is only about 9 years old. So by virtue of the age and the length of time it takes a startup to be successful, we are fortunate to not have that many yet.
There's you have a lot of pain coming in the future.
But funny enough, our most painful miss is a Yale company called Biohaven that we invested in a later round at a much higher price. So we passed on an early round, and then we invested in a later round beyond that, and that early round was enormously successful. So we still benefited from that, but if you look back, it was, we picked the right company, we picked the wrong round.
I think one of the most momentous turndowns was when Mark Zuckerberg was an undergraduate at Harvard, and he finally got a venture capital fund, which, for those familiar with the Boston landscape, there was a time when all the venture capital funds were downtown. Then there was a time when they all migrated out to the suburbs. That was when Zuckerberg was at Harvard. So he had to take a $40 cab ride out to Waltham to be turned down. And he not only, he decided, A, that was kind of a stupid decision on the venture fund's part, but B, he decided that a city where he had to take a $40 cab ride to get to an investor made no sense, and that's what prompted him to move out to California. So that was a pretty momentous turndown. Of course, now in Boston, all the venture capital funds are back either in Cambridge or in the Seaport, which is where my office is. So just a little bit of warning, we're going to wrap up at or shortly after 2:30, which is fast approaching. I will ask in a few minutes for questions to the audience, so if you have any or you're mulling one over, you might want to give that some thought. While we're on this topic of fundraising, Yulia, I want to go back to your venture. Did you raise money outside?
No, zero money.
Is that because you didn't try, because you were smart enough to pass it up?
Trust me, I tried. I think I had about 100 meetings as well from my end, zero success rate, but it turned out to be the best thing ever because I could benefit from my exit very well.
That's great. That's great. Rashik, do you have trouble raising capital within Mercedes-Benz? What's your IRR goal for your activities?
Actually, yeah, when IT gets involved, IT is usually a cost center, so you have to actually figure out how to do this project. So you definitely look for sponsors. It's a tough challenge. Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys doing much in blockchain? Are you looking at it?
There are people looking into that. Okay. Yes, there are some.
For I said it's very active space right now.
Yeah, I think this is the news which is out there. I think Daimler was one of the first companies to have floated 100 million euros in a blockchain. So that was sometime last year in January, around that time frame.
Okay, so turning it over to the audience. Any questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, does Mercedes make strategic investments in other companies?
Yes, what 3 words, the example that I gave you, Daimler has a stake in that company. There are others, yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm an immigration attorney, and wanted to ask this distinguished panel, how do you envision the impact of the recent tightening of visa laws on the availability of human capital from around the world in our innovation ecosystem, and just noting that this distinguished panel itself is a very good reflection of the global talent that's coming on this shore. So I would like some comments from everyone. Thank you.
I mean, I can add as being twice immigrant and one of them in the US. It's definitely not a fun process, but now I'm actually working for a global company that has offices in France, UK, Italy, Spain, Japan, and US. It's really interesting for me and working with the global teams, and I think we're all kind of like stuck in this idea that companies are meant to be together and work in the same physical location. Actually seeing maybe the benefit of this trend that we learn to work with other parts of the globe and very well, I manage team in the Ukraine, and I have team in Paris and in UK, and it's really amazing experience to be able to work in a global organization, make sure all the parts are working as a team. Even with the cultural differences, and learn to kind of like understand each other and get work done. So I think that's one of the positive things, actually. You know what? People don't have to be physically in the US. You can get such an amazing talent. Honestly, some of the best people I work with are in Ukraine and Spain, and really not even in main cities, really in like small towns and sometimes villages. And it's like amazing what kind of talent you find there. I think we're all fixated. And I was the same way. I was trying to find an engineer in New York for a couple of years until I realized it's just not possible because we have, you know, Google and Facebook, and I can't compete with them. And, you know, and then you just kind of like expand your horizons and you look elsewhere, and there's just some incredible talent around the world that doesn't want to live in the States, and they're fine, and they want to work with global companies. So that's kind of my perspective.
I would say for our companies, you know, when the travel ban happened, and then since then, it has had a dampening effect on recruiting. And so when you're working with deeply technical companies, you need deeply technical people. The U.S. in no way has market dominance on the highest quality technical people in the world, whether it's for data scientists or biologists. And so within some of our companies, they had people who were immigrants who were afraid to go home, or some people who are out of the country visiting family, afraid to, you know, had difficulty getting back, and it caused all kinds of dislocation in several of our companies, and have, I think, made people second guess whether they want to come to a U.S. university or take a job here because they're not sure they're going to be able to stay here. And we are in, given how strongly the startup ecosystem is roaring right now, and given how much capital is coming in, and given what's happened at the corporate level, talent is such a challenge that we actually need a worldwide technically competent labor pool to satisfy just the U.S. startup needs. And so anything we do to dampen the ability to do that makes it difficult.
I think it's a great question. I think it's a huge challenge, and actually I think the folks north of the border, especially in Toronto, are licking their chops. I mean, we're seeing a lot of activity up there right now. It's because they're smart enough or courageous enough or just lucky enough to maintain a different approach than we are here in the States. Not to venture into politics. I think we have time for one more question from the crowd. Okay, if not, I want to thank all our panelists for coming today and sharing their thoughts with you. And thank you all for coming too.